Okay. Pride and Prejudice.
Yeah, ready.
5 Bennett sisters.
Uh-huh.
There's Jane, the pretty one. Lizzie, the lively one. Mary, who no one gives a shit about.
Okay.
Kitty, who's sickly and no one really likes very much. And Lydia, who's like the crazy young one.
Right.
Yeah. So, Mr. Bingley comes into town, who's like a pretty rich dude. He comes in. His friend, Mr. Darcy, his like sister, Miss Bingley, like everyone comes in and they're like, where are the rich people in town? And everyone's like, oh my god, we need them to marry our sisters. So Jane and Mr. Bingley get like real tight, but Mr. Darcy's like, no, like, Mr. Bingley, you're too good for these like lowly sisters. So he takes Mr. Bingley away.
Okay.
So Jane's in love with Mr. Bingley. Mr. Bingley's gone. Everyone's very sad.
Wait, what do you mean he's gone? Where does he go?
Mr. Darcy, like, whisks him away to London. He goes to London. He's there.
Oh, all right. And Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingley are tight.
They're tight. They're, like, best friends.
Okay. From, like, way back.
From, like, way back.
They're, like, the tight homies. Okay.
They're, like, tight homies. And Jane and Mr. Bingley, like, get, like, all in cahoots. They, like, dance a bunch. And Mr. Darcy's like, these Bennett sisters are, like, the worst. They, like, may be beautiful, but they're just really poor. And, like, they're just way below us.
We can't trust them? Why can't
Mr.
Mr. Darcy doesn't trust the Bingley sisters?
He doesn't trust that Jane's in love with Mr. Bingley.
Oh, Mr. Bingley, right. Well,
Jane does not trust that. Yeah. And Mr. Bingley's sister, Miss Bingley, is, like, not into Jane. She's not into Elizabeth. Jane gets sick at one time and has to stay at the Bingley's house. And Elizabeth comes and, like, tries to take care of her. And Mr. Darcy starts seeing, like, a little twinkle in his eye about Elizabeth. And Miss Bingley sees it and is like, no, we gotta get these, like, bitches out of here. We gotta, like, separate everyone.
I get that.
Because Miss Bingley is, like, into Mr. Darcy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
In the middle of all of this, their cousin, the Bennett's cousin, Mr. Collins, who is a vicar.
And what is a vicar?
He's like a minister.
A minister, right.
At Rosings Park, which is with, like, a very nice, like, old rich lady who happens to be the aunt of Mr. Darcy.
Wait, Mrs. Rosens Park is...
Rosings Park is the, like, this big, beautiful house.
Okay.
And Mr. Collins is the vicar of said house.
Got it. Okay. All right, I'm with
Mr.
you.
Collins is the cousin of the Bennetts. And the woman who owns Rosings Park is the aunt of Mr. Darcy.
Okay.
So all of that is happening. So Mr. Collins comes and he's like a real idiot. He's just like super dumb. And he tries to marry Jane, to get with Jane. But the mom is like, no. She's going to be married to Mr. Bingley, so, like, don't waste your time on Jane. And then he's like, okay, I'll go for Elizabeth. I'm going to go for Lizzie. And he proposes to Lizzie. Lizzie's like, no, you're a fucking idiot. Like, there's no way I'll ever marry you.
Because you're an old fucking bag.
No, you're just an old man.
Okay.
No, he's not old. He's just stupid.
Stupid
He's
man.
Just very stupid.
Oh, yeah. I mean, old and stupid, you know.
He's just
They're equivalent situations.
stupid.
All right, fair enough.
So her friend Charlotte ends up marrying Mr. Collins. Stupid Mr. Collins.
Okay.
Elizabeth's best friend ends up marrying her. And they go off to this house.
So they're the vicars over in the corner.
So they're over there. Mr. Darcy takes Mr. Bingley away to London. So everyone's separate.
Yes.
Then Elizabeth goes and visits Charlotte at the vicarage. So she visits her best friend, who's now married to Mr. Collins, at the vicarage.
Which is where the vicars live.
Which is where the vicars live.
Who knew?
In Rosings Park.
All right, fair enough.
So she goes there. And Mr. Darcy visits his aunt at the same time.
Okay.
So they're in the same place. So they end up having dinners together and they all hang out. And Mr. Darcy ends up proposing to Elizabeth.
Oh.
And she is just like, you're a complete asshole. You have, like, fucked over my sister. Mr. Darcy's, like, the richest person in England. She's like, you're a dick. Like, absolutely not. And then he's just like, did you think I would be happy to marry you? Like, your family are poor. Like, you're all the worst. Like, you think I'm, like, happy about being in love with you? Like, this is fucking ridiculous.
Like, he's following his heart despite his,
like, better...
You know.
Yeah. So, through all of this, there's this guy who's in the army, Mr... What is his name? Mr. whatever his name.
Right.
Mr...
Why don't you call him, like, Mr. Major?
Mr.
Or Mr. General. How about Mr.
Wickham? Mr. Wickham.
Oh, Mr. Wickham.
So Mr. Wickham is, like, hanging about the sisters. He and, like, Lizzie are kind of, like... And he is talking about how So he grew up with Mr. Darcy.
Okay.
And Mr. Darcy's father died and was going to give Mr. Wickham he was going to allow him to be the, like, vicar of Pemberley. But then apparently Mr. Darcy was like, no, I don't like you, and, like, sent him away. And, like, Mr. Wiggins had to make his way in the world, and it's like, oh, Mr. Darcy, like, really fucked me over. So Lizzie's like, you fucked over Mr. Wickham, you fucked over my sister, you're the worst. So she says, no, I'm not going to marry you. And then the next day he comes and he gives her a letter, and he's like, listen, like, I didn't realize your sister was, like, actually in love with Bingley. I'm sorry I took her away, but this is what actually happened with Mr. Wickham. So what happened was Wickham seduced Mr. Darcy's sister and was trying to marry Mr. Darcy's very young sister. And
so they could get the money?
So he could get the money.
Oh.
Faster. So he, like, broke up the thing and, like, sent Wickham away.
You think he's your friend, but he's not your friend.
He's not your friend. So he's sent Wickham away. So Lizzie's like, okay. Alright, Mr. Darcy, I, like, get it. Fine. And they, like, all go to their own places.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're all, like, hanging out. And then Lizzie goes on a trip to the Lakes country with her aunt and uncle.
Now, I'm assuming that Lizzie is the object of Mr. Darcy's heart.
Yes, and the, like, smart, fun, fiery one.
Right, of course, because everybody likes a smart, fun, fiery one.
Yeah. So, goes to the, like, lakes and is enjoying the lakes, and her aunt is like, we should go to the beautiful house that is, like, in my hometown and, like, view the property. And it happens to be Mr. Darcy's house. And Lizzie's like, no, we can't go to see Mr. Darcy's house. But then the chambermaid is like, no, my cousin works there. It's fine. Mr. Darcy's not at the house. So Lizzie's like, okay, fine. We'll, like,
all right, we got the lowdown info.
Yeah. So she goes to the house. It's this, like, huge, beautiful, crazy house.
And everybody's, like,
everyone's totally nice, and everyone totally loves Mr. Darcy.
Yeah, and it's like, so beautiful.
It's so beautiful, and they're all like, he's the best master, like, he's the most kind person.
Right.
And then they're, like, touring the park, and all of a sudden, she's, like, walking through the woods.
And, like, there he is,
and
right?
There he is.
Of course.
And she's, holy shit, fuck. And she's like, gotta go. But then he is like, you should come back, for, like, dinner. And then Mr. Bingley is there, and they all are, like, friendly and great. And it seems like things are going well. And then Lizzie gets a letter from Jane saying Lydia, the youngest sister, has gone missing from where she's staying at the seaside. And she's run off with Mr. Wickham.
Oh, the vicar returns.
No, not the vicar. The, like, roguish military men who tried to steal his sister.
Oh. Dude.
Steal Mr. Darcy's sister.
Got it.
So she's run off with Mr. Wickham. And
okay.
They've gone to get married. And then they find out that they haven't gotten married. And they're just like, hiding out somewhere.
Living in sin.
There's living in sin somewhere. So Lizzie, like, spirits away, and her, like, uncle, everyone has to, like, go and, like, find Lydia, and her, like, father has to go, and he's like, I'm gonna challenge him to a duel, and they're just like, oh no. And then, the uncle is like, okay, listen, he found them, and I made them marry, and they, like, Lydia and Wickham get married, so it's, like, kind of okay. And the uncle's like, everything's fine, and they're all back. And then the uncle is like, listen, Mr. Darcy's the one who found them. Mr. Darcy's the one who paid for them to get married. And Mr. Darcy figured this all out. And then Mr. Darcy visits Elizabeth, and then he's like, I still love you. And she's like, yeah, I love you too. And then they get married.
Wow. That's quite the story.
That's what happens.